the cloud. Okay, so we have here in person, we have Dimitri and we have Alan. So just so that everyone gets I know this camera is a little bit, hi Alan. And
I think I met most of you guys on Sunday.
Exactly. I think that was a very cool element of the Sunday party that I couldn't have previously noticed. Ah, Dimitri. But we missed Dimitri on Sunday. We got his better half. If you met Mila on Sunday, then you met Dimitri's wife and Danielle, his daughter. So we did miss you, Dimitri. Okay, so here we go. Oh, it's all about responsibility. That's what we're talking about tonight. So a fellow takes on a new job and he's interviewing for the job and for the particular position in the company. And the fellow who's interviewing him across the desk says, you know what, for this job, you really need somebody who's responsible. And so the fellow who's interviewing, his eyes light up. He's like, I'm your man. I'm your guy. In the previous job that I was at, whenever anything went wrong, they would all say, you're responsible. So I'm your man for responsibility. The question is, what are you responsible for? To what degree do we have responsibility to one another? There you go. Alan, thank you. Alan is giving us the full laugh here. And it's appreciated. How much are we responsible for one another? And what value does that seem to feature uniquely in the Jewish sources, and maybe it's a little bit lacking in the secular laws and the secular systems of law? And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. So what we'll do is we'll have 3 case studies. I don't know if you've began to love or hate the case studies, but I think they're pretty intriguing, the case studies. Okay. Yeah. I'm getting some nods. Good. So we'll do 3 case studies, and then we'll jump into the background of the Jewish value, the sources in the Torah that give us an idea of responsibility, and then we'll come back to answering our case studies according to the Jewish perspective. So this is interesting how all of our lessons have come down to the very core idea that's spoken of in the name of the course. Beyond right, about not only is it our rights that we're careful about when we think about law and civil law, but in Jewish civil law, it's about doing what's right. Not just about your rights, but about doing what's right. And that's come through very clearly in the first lesson, where we spoke about going, so to speak, beyond the letter of the law when one is not losing out, and you could, without losing anything, you could benefit another. You're actually obligated to do what's right, to benefit another. We spoke about it last week when it was a question of how do we deal with a criminal, or how do we deal with somebody looking to return, and how do we put the steps in front of them to make it doable, to allow them to do what's right, even after they've messed up. Now that's a twist. Even after they've messed up, we want to allow others to do what's right and not make it difficult for them. And then today, in today's lesson as well, we'll see the similar feature of that value about doing what's right, not just holding on to the law in the simple term of managing the situation to the best we can, but rather doing what's right, doing what's ideal. Case study number 1. Please take a look at your student books, page 76. And this is an unfortunate incident, and I mean, unfortunately, it's not just a thing of the past, but it's something that comes up and just came up recently as well. Case study A, Joseph C. Meek, Jr. who could we ask? Susan, would you mind going ahead and reading for us if you're up for it?
Actually, I've misplaced my book. I'm sorry to say. So
Oh my gosh.
I'll let somebody
Well,
else.
You're reminding me then to share the screen. So what I'll do is I will where's a good place? Wait. Sorry for this.
Okay, I'm still looking for it.
Shared media. Here we go. There we go. Now let's go to Zoom, share screen. Share. Okay, so we won't trouble you to read because I know it's a little bit more difficult here, but at least you'll get a chance to look in with everybody.
So
Okay,
I
so-
guess I could read it.
If you'd like.
Joseph Meek Jr., a friend of Dylan S. Roof's. That's correct, is that?
Yes.
Who spent time with him in the weeks before 9 people were killed at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church here, was sentenced Tuesday to 27 months in prison for hampering and misleading the federal authorities in the aftermath of Mr. Roof's racist massacre. Mr. Meek, 22, pleaded guilty last April to 2 federal counts related to the truthfulness of his responses to the FBI in interviews shortly after the shooting on June 17, 2015. Misprison of a felony and making a false statement to a law enforcement officer. Misprision refers to the failure to report a known crime. The government did not prosecute Mr. Meek for failing to disclose knowledge of Mr. Roof's plans to attack the church, although it asserted in court filings that his silence, quote, did deprive law enforcement of the opportunity to intervene, unquote. During a night of drinking and drug use about a week before the shootings, Mr. Roof told Mr. Meek that he wanted to kill Black people at a historic African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston in order to start a race riot, according to FBI summaries of interviews with him. Mr. Meek was concerned enough to hide Mr. Roof's handgun after he fell asleep, but later returned it and not report the threat to law enforcement. Quote, certainly defendant's failure to make an earlier report is tragic and deeply regrettable, but his failure to report was not a violation of federal criminal law, unquote, Judge Gergel wrote last week in an order that denied prosecutors' request to give Mr. Meek a longer term than recommended in sentencing guidelines. In his initial FBI interview, Mr. Meek denied having known of Mr. Roof's plans and said Mr. Roof had not spoken of a target for his attack, according to Assistant United States Attorney Julius N. Richardson. But in a second interview, Mr. Meek admitted that he had lied, according to an FBI synopsis of the session. He also admitted that on the night of the shootings, after concluding that Mr. Roof was responsible for the attack, he told others not to contact law enforcement.
Wow. Okay, so thank you, first of all, Susan, for reading a rather long text beautifully. And I don't know how many of you, by raise of hands, are familiar with this incident.
Well, yeah.
Incident,
Okay.
yes, the shooting.
Yes, with the shooting. Okay, so think about it. You had somebody who had intimate knowledge of the plans of Dylan Roof to go ahead and commit a massacre at this African, at what was called a African Methodist church, Episcopal church. There you go. And therefore, he could have really, and he actually knew how he could have taken away the gun, which he did. He could have gone further and warn the people involved, or at least the circle of friends around Dylan Roof to kind of get somebody else involved here to change his mind, to talk to him about it. Or he could have gone to the authorities. And he did none of the above. It's a question for you. Joseph Meek knew of Dylan Roof's intention to commit a massacre and chose not to report it to the authorities who could have prevented it. Or let's say, chose not to report it, not only to the authorities, really to anyone who could have prevented it. Despite that, his failure to report a planned crime in advance did not constitute a legal offense. Now, that was part of the whole long text there, was to differentiate between what was charged and what he was then found guilty for. He did lie to the authorities in his first interview, and that's ultimately what he paid the price for. But he was not charged, though it did affect the authorities' capability of dealing with the incident, though it did hamper their authority, their position to help. He was not charged for not reporting this crime or this crime to be to the authorities. So in your opinion, should the act of reporting a plot that involves a serious crime be considered option A, commendable, option B, morally imperative, or option 3, a legal obligation? So I'd like to start from the bottom. Would you consider it a legal obligation? Just going to pause here so we could all see each other again. Would you consider a legal obligation to report a crime that you know is coming up, is about to occur, or that could be prevented?
Yes,
Yes.
I think so.
Oh, wow. Okay. So US law does not follow that conclusion, but you're saying it should be a legal obligation. Anybody else here say that it should be morally imperative?
Both.
Both, thank you. And then obviously also commendable. Very good, very, very good. So that's where we're holding. That's amazing. It's getting the temperature here. Now I'll share an interesting thing recently that took place. Not interesting, excuse me. Unfortunately, the fellow who went to the school recently in Texas also divulged of his intent to a lady friend online. They didn't really know each other. They didn't know each other intimately for sure, but they were connected online, and he shared of his intent to do this terrible act. Now, apparently they spoke to her afterwards, and she said, I mean, I'd never imagined that he was serious, that he would actually do something like that.
That's the problem, because it seems to be in an ideal world, everybody would say, yes, of course, you must tell and prevent, but in the real world, it's not as simple as it seems to be to prevent something which did not happen.
Very good.
You know, so many people are joking, silly jokes, telling, oh, I hate, I would kill, blah, 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 but actually don't do it.
Very good. Very, very good. Thank you. That's a very valid point. So how quick are you in your case where you say it's you're legally obligated to report it? How quick are you to report everything that you find that somebody says?
I think that it's not such a big deal to let the school know that you heard this. I mean, there's nothing wrong with alerting people of the possibility.
Okay.
Even, I mean, in this day and age especially, it happens all the time that they are alerted to things that they heard might happen.
Right.
I don't think it's a stretch.
Right. Excellent. So thank you. And what's interesting though, is that there's the other side of the coin is you don't want to create an environment where people are telling on other people all the time. So to speak, that everyone's going to the government to tell on whatever somebody else thought or wanted to do, or, you know, that's also not an environment we want to encourage. And yet there, like you're saying, Jane, there might be a middle path of doing something about what you're concerned about without saying, okay, I'm going to call 911. No, there are a few steps that you could take to address the issue directly with the individual or with the people close with the individual and prevent it ahead of time. The question is, are you obligated to, are you responsible to, or could you, just say, you know what, just do my thing. Yes, Jane.
Well, I mean, in the example of the gal who, saw this online, I mean, if he had mentioned the school, there's nothing wrong with just even anonymously letting the school know that somebody passed this comment on Facebook. And at least you're alerting them that, the possibility, and there are things that schools then can do,
That's exactly the case in this case study, that he had knowledge of the exact location
right.
of the exact target. And
Right.
that's what he lied to the authorities about later on.
Right. And all he had to do anonymously was let the church know
Right.
that there is somebody that is planning, has talked about targeting them, so
Absolutely.
there's a very easy middle ground where you don't have to,
Okay, thank you. So that's unless there's anybody that has a particular comment.
This way, it would be easy to prevent it on that day. But nothing will prevent him to do it in a week or in a month.
No, but then the
Unless
school
they
could
want to
set up
close.
certain security needs, and the people around him could look to intervene and convince him otherwise. Or to,
Yes, but they're speaking about just letting the church know.
Right.
That's not enough.
Right. Okay, so you would be obligated to do what you can. Absolutely. So then going from a case of unfortunate magnitude of shooting, how about case study B? And I like the fact that it was very legally obligated in the first case. What do you think about case study B? And consider that we're going to want to make this case study work and not argue with it. We want to make it work for our sentiment here so that we could understand it rather than make it impossible to understand. But if that means clarifying the details, then we'd be glad to. Rachel, case study B. Rachel strolls along the street one evening. I'll take the reading here. And she strolls along the street one evening. And sorry, my bad. Here we go. Passing a store that is closed for the night. Now, I'm going to play around with it a little bit. Rachel is familiar with this area. She knows the particular nature of this store. She's been past the store again and again on her stroll in the evening. And every single time she passes by the store, the lights are closed, the air conditioning is off, there is no fan that tells her that the air conditioning is running. The place is locked up tight. And she knows that the owner is careful about his dollars. And that's why every night it's shut, the lights are off, and the AC is off. Tonight, as she walks by, she notices that the air conditioner was left on when it was supposed to be off. This is costing the store owner money. It's going to be on a whole night long until the fellow comes in the next morning. Or if it's a Friday evening, it's going to be on a whole weekend until he comes in on Monday morning. Rachel is, let's say, unaware of the exact the store's exact identity. She knows the neighborhood. She doesn't have his name and his number, but she'll easily be able to procure that from the operators of nearby stores that are still open. Okay, here's the question for you. In your opinion, should the effort to alert the store owner to a costly oversight be considered commendable, morally imperative, or even a legal obligation?
This is Mimi.
Okay, go ahead, Mimi.
Okay, I'm going to give you an example. All right. I'm going to say commendable, but
Okay, thank you.
okay, wait. We had a store on Whaley Avenue. It was a pharmacy. So you know how people feel about pharmacies. Some people, they think it's a good place to rob them, either for cigarettes, which we sold, or drugs. You know.
Wow.
Okay. So there are break-ins. The answer to this question is, being a store owner, maybe he had to leave the air conditioning on because of some of the merchandise that he has in the store. It's commendable that you would go to maybe somebody else and say, call your neighbor and tell him the air conditioning is on. So she doesn't have to get involved more than that. I had a friend who lived in the neighborhood. He saw a robbery in our store happening.
Wow.
He's called us up. The alarm people called us up. He stayed in by the store until my husband came down. That's a mitzvah. That is a wonderful person. His name was Fedowitz, and I'm sure some of the people from here know about him.
Sure.
So this is an example.
Cool.
This is an example of a man who had a moral imperative, I would say. And I think he would do it for anybody, but he did it because of us. That's my answer.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Wow, that's a big deal. So had he not done that, it would have cost you. And ultimately, he went, without spending a dime, he went and put his time and stress levels, which I think is pretty valuable. He put he put himself into the act of trying to get you the money that was going to be lost to you.
Well, the money would be lost if they did rob the store. We had to, wait till the people came and put glass into the front of the window. The police came and reported and all these kind of things, and aggravation and getting up in the morning, because he used to be a vegetable man and he used to go down to get vegetables to sell in his store. So it was a combination of things, but he was a very moral person, as it is. Took care of his sick parents and wonderful family. So there was aggravation more than losing money. Money was not part of it. The aggravation was, why did they do it? And we knew why. So of course, afterwards, we got a gate on the front of the store. And at nighttime, when we closed up the store, we broke down the gate. What they do, they try to break in from the back. Okay, so that did not deter them.
We'll have to hear the rest of the story, Mimi. Hopefully, some good things that the pharmacy had as well. We'll have to hear a good anecdote from Mr. Hashem. But thank you. That's an amazing example. Very good. So you see the value in somebody putting themselves out in such a way. But practically, let's raise hands. Do you consider it a legal obligation for a person who notices and could prevent the loss of money for another? Would you consider a legal obligation to go ahead and put in your efforts to save them that money? No, I'm seeing no's. No's. Okay. I can't see Richard's. There we go, Richard. No. Okay.
I'd say it's not a legal obligation.
How about morally imperative?
If all you're talking about is saving money for the air conditioning, I would say no.
Okay, that's because it's a little bit of money. Let's say it was a lot of money.
Maybe.
Maybe.
Depends on what
Ronnie
you mean
still
by
says
a
no.
lot. Why would it be a lot of money?
Let's say the jewelry store was left unlocked.
Then it should be reported.
It should be a legal obligation.
I'm not sure. A legal obligation, probably not.
Okay.
But certainly a what shall we call it, a moral obligation?
Moral imperative. Okay. Anybody stick with just commendable? Okay.
I would, but I just want to comment that there's a reality to someone sticking out their neck in these ways, and that is they're actually putting themselves into danger, because the people that are doing a break-in, let's say, are likely to be violent. And if you're in their way, you're an obstacle that they may decide to get rid of. And that could be fatal or serious. So I think you have to evaluate that your physical well-being and possibly your life would be at risk once you decide to do something considered commendable, okay? Because it's not legal and it's not necessarily moral.
Okay, thank you. Good point. Let's pause and say, so there is what you're risking by putting yourself involved, or maybe sometimes it's not a risk, you know, you're definitely losing in some way. Either you're giving of your time or you're giving of your resource, you're paying for something that you could do so you could help another. Would you be obligated even if it came at your cost? Now think of what we learned previously about when it comes at a cost to you or when it comes at no cost to you.
Right.
And so yes, obviously if it's going to cost you your life, chas v'shalom, you should not be one to put yourself in danger to save, especially just the finances of somebody else. But how about if it would cost you 2 cents and it's going to cost this fellow $2 million? Maybe that is a scale that will work with. Okay, so this is good. This is good. This is great, actually. Finally, how about spirituality? How about the moral compass of the world? How about a person's direction in life? How about if you had the opportunity to guide somebody forward or to influence someone's life in a positive way? So it's not necessarily physical danger to their life, to another life. It's not necessarily financial loss to another, but this is just simply the opportunity that you have. You see someone going down the wrong road, and you could influence them in some way. And I'm going to give you this example. We had last lesson a discussion of Jonad Szegedi, right? The fellow from Hungary who was really, unfortunately, in with a crowd of people that were nationalists in Hungary, that were racists, that were committing murders because of their beliefs, their ideologies, and they were generating a hate in an entire country. They had a militia set up. They had so many things set up based on their ideologies. In the case of Jonad, he didn't know that he was Jewish, and nobody else around him knew that he was Jewish. But let's switch the scenario a little bit for our case study now. Using the example of the fellow from Hungary. Let's say he knew he was Jewish. And let's say that you knew he was Jewish as well, and you saw the direction that he was beginning to take. or you saw some of his activities, some of his speeches, would you consider it a legal obligation to get involved in some way? That means it's a legal obligation on you to get involved in some way to influence his path for the better. Or would you consider it just morally imperative or only commendable in the sense of your responsibility to Jonat, to him as a person and to the environment that he is creating? How would you respond in that case? I'll give you a moment, just think about it. And it's maybe hard to think about when you're in America and he was in Hungary. Okay, so you're a fellow living in Hungary and you happen to live down the road and you know of Jonat and he's a family friend or he's even a relative. Where it makes sense that this is something that you're connected with. But the question is it your responsibility, or like we love to say, live and, not we love to say, right? Like some people love to say, live and let live. It's none of my beeswax. Whatever he's doing is what he's doing. It's none of my business. His choices in life, that's whatever he'll do, whatever it will cost him, it's his choice. So I'm going to ask for hands. Would you consider it a legal obligation? That means it's your legal responsibility to do your best to influence his decisions and his direction.
No.
No. I see some no responses here. How about you, Alan?
Can I say something? I'm sorry, this is Mimi.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, if you're in the United States or if you're in New Haven or in the vicinity in Washington, you have ADL. You have an organization that you can go to and ask for advice, what you should do. All right, and they will help you. So you're not alone.
Good, good. But do you have a responsibility? Maybe ADL doesn't know about this.
Right. Yes, I have a responsibility, but personally, I would speak to that person. I would try to tell them what it was like during the Holocaust or before. So the big word is teaching. Teaching what it was like and what it is like for the Jews, what it's like to be Jewish.
Mimi, I hear you. I'm not looking to get into how this would be done, but rather, what is your responsibility? Do you have, yes, a responsibility, or no, you do not have a responsibility? So far, I'm seeing shaking of the heads here. You don't have a legal obligation.
All right. As an Israeli, I do. As a Jew, I do.
Oh, okay. Very good. So
Okay.
Jewish law might just agree with you. Okay. And legally imperative, I mean, morally imperative. How about that? Do we have any hands for morally imperative?
Morally, but not legally.
Okay. But it's an imperative for you morally to get involved. Wow. Richard, that means you got to walk out your front door and do something about this. Or pick up the phone and call someone about this. That means that you've got to actually do something. You can't just say, I'm on the team that supports the moral imperative. You've got to do something.
Right.
I'm gonna qualify the statement here also, because I think that we had a lot of opinions when it came to the ganef and what the ganef does or doesn't need to return to his victim. Remember, going back 2 lessons, when the ganef stole, and the question was, what is he obligated to return to his victim? And we all got very involved. I think it's important to know that you've got to have an opinion, and not just an opinion, but you've got to have an opinion that you're willing to state and you're willing to stand by and you're willing to do something about, even when it comes to moral and spiritual, so to speak, areas. Because we live a life that is not just material. We live a life that is full of experience, full of meaning, and full of morals and directions that people take and choices that people make. And our involvement and responsibility is huge in this way. Or do we sit back and say, well, I'm just going to leave it for the teachers. The teachers should be the ones to do their job. And whoever else it is that's involved should be the parents, should be the ones to do it involved. But maybe I shouldn't be responsible for somebody else's kid. Okay, so far we landed up with the morally imperative and commendable as the ideal in this case. But it really, again, it means that you've got a responsibility. That's a big deal. I'm going to share with you, just to lighten up the mood a little bit here, something that, though I did not come across this on my own, but it was shared from another instructor that you might just enjoy.
All right, Fatso, out of the car. I'm gonna capture this. Come on! Don't you?
This is the money for the lipo.
See, the great thing about robbing a fat guy is it's an easy getaway, you know? They can't really chase you.
It's actually doing him a favor. It's less money for him to buy food. What you want? Come on! Come on, come on!
That's a shame. All right, I'm gonna call NBC.
Officer! He's stealing my car! Officer, I was carjacked. I was held up at gunpoint, and he took my wallet, everything.
Okay, thanks anyway. They can't get another plane.
All right, what's wrong with the plane we got? They're just checking it out.
Oh, forget that.
No, not getting on there. Come on, let's get something to eat here in Sticksville.
All right. Hold it right there.
What?
You're under arrest.
Under arrest? What for?
Article 223-7 of the Latham County Penal Code.
What? No, we didn't do anything.
That's exactly right. The law requires you to help or assist anyone in danger as long as it's reasonable to do so.
I never heard of that.
It's new. It's called the Good Samaritan Law.
Wow.
Let's go.
That was the last episode, yeah.
Good Samaritan law? Are they crazy?
Why would we want to help somebody?
I know.
That's what nuns and Red Cross workers are for. Very helpful to people.
All right. Excuse me. Hi. Could you tell me what kind of law this is?
Well, they just passed it last year.
Ah.
And it's modeled after the French law. I heard about it after Princess Diana was killed and all those photographers were just standing around.
Oh, yeah.
And you're the first ones to be arrested on it, probably in the whole country.
All right, so what's the penalty? Let's pay the fine or something and get the hell out of here.
Well, it's not that easy. See, now the law calls for a maximum fine of $85,000 and as much as 5 years in prison.
What?
Oh, no. We have to be in California next week. We're starting a TV show.
California? Oh, gosh, I don't think so. Yeah, my guess is you're going to be prosecuted. Better get yourselves a good lawyer.
Who told you to put the cheese on? Did I tell you to put the cheese on? I didn't tell you to put the cheese on.
Jerry Seinfeld on the phone.
You people with the cheese. It never ends. Hello? Good Samaritan law. I never heard of it. You don't have to help anybody. That's what this country's all about. That's deplorable, unfathomable, improbable. Hold on. Susie, cancel my appointment with Dr. Bison and pack a bag for me. I want to get to Latham, Massachusetts right away.
Okay, there you go. So a little bit about whether you are or are not obligated to step in when you're on the sidelines. Now, I'll tell you that there is a duty to rescue law in some European countries, which means you have the duty to rescue. So that if you do not do anything, if you just sit there, we could actually, in those countries, they could actually charge you.
Yeah.
But in the United States, that is not the case, first of all. Second of all, the Good Samaritan law is not the way it is presented in this case here. So never mind Seinfeld. But the fact is that that's not the case in the United States. In general, this is an interesting thing. In general, law is uncomfortable with charging you for an omission of an act and will be much more comfortable to charge you for a commission of an act. That means that when you do something, we have something to hold in our hand and say, oh, you did it, and we'll charge you for it. When you don't do something, it's much more difficult for the law to charge you. And for the simple reasoning, like Dimitri said before, is because you don't actually know what's going on in the mind of the person. Just say, oh, I know that you knew that. What do you mean you knew that I knew? How do you know that I know? Okay, there are obviously cases where it's easier to say, you know, you were right next to him, you could have stuck out your hand, picked him up, and you just let him lie on the floor. You didn't have to think, you didn't have to, but ultimately, the law is much more comfortable with a commission of a crime rather than an omission of some sort of act. That's a general across the board. And even in Jewish law, we'll find there are nuances about that, but that is generally the case, that you won't be charged in terms of being liable for punishment for an omission, but you would be liable towards heaven, because heaven usually knows what you're thinking. So that's one up that Jewish law has over most other laws, is that this is a godly institution, and therefore what is going through your mind and the choices you made, you are responsible for. There was one more thing that I was looking to add. Ooh, crazy story that just came up, that I came across today in Arizona, in a place called Tempe, Arizona. There were two policemen that were talking with an individual, and he was sitting on a bench just next to the river where there was a railing in front. At some point, he climbed over the railing. They had a pretty reasonable conversation with him. They weren't challenging him or attacking him or making him super nervous, forcing him over the railing. At some point, he climbed over the railing, and he didn't jump in quite yet. He sat on the edge for a while, and they were still and then he jumped in. And they, unfortunately, didn't help him out. And he could have maybe helped himself. Ultimately, he lost his life. And the policemen they were there, but they were on steady ground, and he was in the water, and they were never given training or any tools to help somebody who's drowning without putting themselves at risk of drowning themselves. Now, I'll just put it into context. A police officer is wearing his stuff that he's wearing is enough to drown any person on a good day. So for them to just jump in the water and say, hey, let me save him, especially if he's a little bit deranged and he could pull you under with him, is just not, okay, I really don't think, I'm not challenging them, because I think it's very important to realize that in this case, they were not given any training nor any way of helping, no tools. They had no tools in their belt to really help him. But ultimately, they were dealing with it as it is their job in the police force. They weren't thinking of it as it just is their moral responsibility, possibly. Yeah. Which meant maybe they should have undressed and jumped in and helped him just because. Okay, maybe he was more of a threat than we know. Maybe they realized how deranged this fellow is, and you know, it's not whatever it was. But ultimately, it's just so different when you see it as a responsibility than when you see it as your job within the context of, or, you know, nowadays also there is a duty to report for medical professionals. Medical professionals have the duty to report an abuse that they're aware of by way of their profession. That means that if they're aware of an abuse that's going on, let's say in a school, the school nurse is obligated to report an abuse that's happening. And if she doesn't, she could be held responsible. So that's only within the medical field and within that that particular line of work, but not across the board. Same with lawyers.
True in
There's
school
attorney-client privilege, but if they find that their client has intent to harm,
yes,
then they are legally obligated.
Wow.
It just seems that what is required for legal professionals and medical professionals is not yet gone
Same.
down to the civilian level in secular law.
Interesting. So Alan is saying the same is with legal professionals, that if they come across, if they're aware of an intent to harm.
Social workers as well.
Yeah.
Social workers and psychologists also.
Right. There is a list of people.
And teachers as well, if they're aware that there's some abuse going on the home front, they're obligated to report and make sure that it's going to people within the district or the school that are, able to facilitate some kind of help.
Excellent.
I
Excellent.
think guidance counselors too.
Yeah.
When I read about that Asian woman in New York who was beat up on the street, the woman in her 60s, I ordered pepper spray. Not for me, because I thought if I was there,
very good.
At least I would pepper spray the guy,
Yeah, that's
very good. Thank you. That's a great example.
Yeah.
Of not only kind of being, I'm on that team, but I'm actually responsible personally.
Right.
And so I'm going to have to do something about it. We love to be on the right team. That's across the board, we always want to be on the right team. But to be the one who will actually put himself out, the joke or the story of a fellow who's in prison in a Russian Soviet prison, and he's in the gulags, and they had one particular prisoner who was a tightrope walker. He was a tightrope walker. He could walk across a tightrope, and they heard about his ability, and one day the authorities allowed him to share of his skill. And so he's sharing his skill in front of this big crowd. Everyone's cheering and cheering. And he manages to walk from one point to another, very, very high up. He set up his rope. He walks from one side to the other. There are a few good stories about this incident, but the one part of it I'll end with is here. So he finishes his walk and everyone's cheering. And then he pulls out a wheelbarrow and he says, okay, who's coming with me? And he's ready to walk across, holding somebody in the wheelbarrow. And there are no takers. So we're ready to cheer for the right thing sometimes, but to actually step forward is a big deal.
But I was going to say, to Jane's point, when you're prepared, and let's say you know how to use a weapon and you carry a weapon, you're in a far better position to take steps to help someone. Because without that training and without that confidence, you're at such a decided disadvantage that you are potentially putting yourself in harm's way. And
yes, but Ronnie, let's not put it all the way to the question of a weapon. You are responsible. You've got to do what you could do. You don't have a weapon on you, but you've got to actually make a move.
Yeah.
Use your voice.
Right,
Use
of course.
something.
Yeah.
And then again, if it's putting yourself in danger, maybe that's not the ideal. But this Rachel walking past a store with the fellow having left his AC on until the coming after the weekend on Monday, he's going to figure out that his store had the AC on all the time and he didn't need to have it on. Then it's stepping forward without any real, and nobody's putting you in danger while you make this phone call.
But by the way, that Seinfeld episode was the final episode. And I found it so abhorrent and repulsive.
Everyone did.
That, I loved Seinfeld and it almost made it easy. I don't know if they did it on purpose, but it made it easy to let Seinfeld go. Because it's so,
okay, that's interesting.
so for it. Yeah, it's so repulsive.
The concept of the episode is interesting, but years later, Jerry said, well, the episode wasn't funny. And this is a comedy show, so it got the worst ratings of like.
Wow.
It was terrible. It was terrible.
Yeah, it wouldn't fly on today's television. I don't think so. Anyways, here we are at the next part of the class. So thank you for all the input and the engagement. Here we are ready to discover what are the Jewish Torah sources that address the concept of responsibility, but not only in an external way, but also internally. What are the reasons for why Torah sees the responsibility of one to another? And take a look together on student page 86. Oh no, my bad. Student page, not 86, student page 83, which is very cool because it relates to a very recent holiday we just celebrated. Student page 83 is here. And if you need to zoom in, I think you could zoom in on your own, Susan, as well. The acceptance of the Torah. Our responsibility and duty to one another goes back to our acceptance of the Torah. We accepted, along with the acceptance of the Torah, we accepted responsibility to one another. Let's look at it. In text number 1, student page 83. And Alan, want to take us forward?
The people all responded in unison. We will do everything God has said.
Thank you. Okay, so let's take text number 2 together with that. We will do everything God had said, and they responded so in unison, which means they were all together in that. What does it mean that they were all together in that response? They were so united in that response. So the Medrash explains what was going on in their minds as they accepted that responsibility with that statement. Go ahead.
When the Jewish people accepted God's rule at Mount Sinai, they did so joyfully as one, as the verse states. The people all responded in unison. In doing so, they even committed to serving as guarantors for each other.
Oh, wow. Okay, so the big word there, and sorry, Susan, there you go. Joyful guarantee. The big word there is guarantors. How does it work? If you were to become a guarantor for another, how does it work? Could you jump in and tell me? What is a guarantor? What role does a guarantor play in a transaction or in a scenario? Whoever's ready, just go ahead.
They're going to be the fully responsible party. I mean, if something should go bad, then, a loan default, whatever, they're guaranteeing that the money will get paid.
Absolutely. Thank you. They're fully responsible. They're not just saying, when you're in a tough spot, give me a call. No, they're putting themselves in place. They are responsible. The Jewish people took on that they would be responsible for each other. They're guarantors to help each other in the sense of how we're going to be able to do the Torah and mitzvahs together and accomplish this mission, this divine mission together. And what's interesting is that you could describe this in many ways, but there is another medrash that looks to describe the sense of acharayut in Hebrew, the sense of responsibility and connection that we have to each other. Also looking at it from a bit of an internal perspective. Take a look at text number 3. How does the Medrash elaborate on this responsibility? Text 3, student page 85. And Dimitri, we'll go to our other in-person thing here. Read for us text 3.
All Jews are mutually responsible. This can be compared to a ship, where a hole has been ruptured in one of its cabins. We do not exclaim a cabin has ruptured, rather we say the entire ship is ruptured.
Thank you. So think about it. In the secular world, every person and every home is on its own mission, doing its own thing, minding their own business. But in a world with this perspective of a divine mission, of a world that there is a destination, there is somewhere that we want to get to. We want to get to a better world. We want to get to a world with a more divine conscious world. How does the Medrash describe it? That we're all on the same boat. And when you're on the same boat and you begin to drill a hole under your particular bed, nobody's going to say, you know what, let him mind his own business. If it's his cabin, it's all of our cabins. We're all in this together. That's maybe just conceptually to appreciate this responsibility to one another. We're all bringing success for one another. We're all responsible to help one another achieve that success. And we're all responsible for the actions that we cause. Now, you could say maybe, you know what? If he was actually digging under his cabin and digging a hole in the ship, you know what? Then is a good time to get involved and say, I think it's not a good idea. But what if he was just smoking in his cabin? Okay, he's polluting the air a little bit, but it's not that bad, right? It's just one little thing. Maybe I'll let him do his thing. What's one little action? I should get involved just for this. So if you need a better source than Maimonides, I don't have too much of a better source than Maimonides, but I'll share with you what Maimonides says. What the Rambam says. The Rambam is on page 85, excuse me.
Well, 86.
And I'll ask Richard, if you don't mind, to read for us text number 5.
Text number
page
5?
87. Sorry, no, my bad.
I think you're on the wrong page.
Text number 4.
Yeah.
Text number 4?
Yes.
The text number 4 in Hebrew, or text number 4 on the next page?
In English.
We should always consider ourselves and the entire world as equally balanced between merit and guilt. If we perform one transgression, we may tip our personal balance and that of the entire world to the side of guilt, and we bring destruction upon everyone. Conversely, if we perform one mitzvah, we may tip our balance and that of the entire world to the side of merit, bringing deliverance and salvation to all. This dynamic is reflected in the verse, "A righteous person is the foundation of the world." That's Proverbs 10:25, meaning that a person who acts righteously tips the balance of the entire world and saves it.
Thank you. Beautiful. So there you go. It's not about one action or another action, because we don't really have the correct scale to weigh and balance which action is the one that I'm going to get involved. You know, it's like ratings on TV. What are we going to allow our children to watch? Well, this maybe not so much, but that I'm not going to get involved that they shouldn't watch that. You know, it's not so bad. Or where do you draw the line? You know, what's the deal? And so here is the perspective that every action counts. And so we're not looking here to the worst case scenario. We're even considering every single time, every single opportunity that you have to help another succeed and to help them from falling or failing in their particular area and mission. That's a big deal. And Kol Yisrael, all Jewish or all people, in this case, it's talking to the Jewish people, and therefore their responsibility to each other. And it says that they are arevim zelazeh. They are responsible for one another. They are guarantors for one another. But I'm going to play with you a little exercise here because I think it's fascinating, even though we're running shorter on time, but we'll get to the end of our case studies. They added a lot of things in this lesson that you could read afterwards, which are interesting, but here, whiteboards. Let's look, loading the whiteboard. Okay, it didn't come out exactly as I thought it would, but you have these three letters, the ayin, the resh, and the bet. These are three Hebrew letters. And what's interesting is that they have at least 3 or 4 meanings without even changing the order of the letters. The word arev is the word that we're referring to here, which is a guarantor. The word arev also could be translated as mixed in. The Jewish people are not only guarantors for one another, but why are they guarantors? Because they are mixed in with each other. They are connected. They are united with one another. They are commingled with one another. And that is that's the core of the responsibility, because we're connected, just like you wouldn't leave your brother or your sister or someone that's close to you in the community. You wouldn't leave them hanging. You wouldn't leave anyone that's connected closely to you hanging. And that's the sense of closeness, which creates the responsibility to one another. And then Arev also has a third translation, which is raven. Okay, Arev is a raven kind of bird. Thank you. But before we go to the birds, Arev means sweet. It means sweet. And that's the positive sense of, you're not only a guarantor, that you're responsible. It's a sweet connection. It's the sweetness of everyone united together and the joint direction that we have. Looking at life not as a burden I have to deal with everyone around me, but rather that God placed me in an environment that I have all these people with me, which means that I'm connected with them, which means that I'm responsible for them. You know, they say you can't pick your note. You can pick your note. You can't pick your friend's note. I don't know how it works, but you can't always choose your neighbors. You can't always choose your co-workers. But guess what? God does have a say in who will be your co-worker. God has an involvement with the world, and if He's placed you with those around you, it's because He knows that you're going to be responsible and connected with those people to do what you can to help. And that's the essence of these words. By the way, there is one more meaning to Arev. Evening. Thank you. The evening prayer is the Arevit, and that's another translation of the word Erev. That's why the Jewish, that's why it's like one Jew, 2 opinions, right? Or 2 Jews, 3 opinions, because in Hebrew, everything can have multiple meanings, and there's multiple layers, and there's, so you're always arguing at different levels and different layers of the same thing.
Some English words have 70 and more meanings, like go.
Go. Oh, wow. Okay. I'm not competing then. 70 is a lot. Close this whiteboard. Okay. Hands up if you enjoyed that exercise of discovering a Hebrew word and the many meanings. I'm curious. Okay, I got a few good smiles at least. Thank you. I couldn't put in the nikudot, the vowels for it, but you'll excuse me for that. Okay, so here we are. We know that we're responsible for one another because we accepted that responsibility. And that responsibility was also expressed in other areas and in other places in the Torah. But let's look at an actual case in Jewish law and see how we're responsible for one another. And what we're going to do is we're going to reflect the same 3 case studies as we had when we started. We're going to start with a case of mortal danger, and then go to a case of financial loss, and then to a case of spiritual and moral direction. And welcome, Mushka. It's good to see Mushka on as well. I guess that means the kids are sleeping. Okay, here we are. Soulful unity. Text number 5 tells us about the connection of all of our souls. But we're going to skip now to text 6a. And Ronnie, I'm going to put it up here on the screen. Could you read for us text 6a?
I don't know if I can get it big enough. I was using the magnifying glass here, but it doesn't seem to be.
How about now?
That's much better. Okay. So is it the paragraph that says life and livelihood?
Oh, well, you could actually skip to the actual text. Illegal bystanding.
Oh, just do not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood.
That's right. That's what it says in Leviticus. Do not stand by at the shedding of your fellow's blood, or do not stand by don't stand off to the side and do nothing.
Like the policeman and the guy who jumped over, right?
Excellent, excellent. So you're asking who is your fellow? In this case, it's talking to an audience or the person that is Jewish. But I would imagine that the extension of this and the soul of this, the soul of the law, is applicable for everyone, every life. And really every person has a soul.
Yeah.
And this is actually dealt with in another section of the class, that these are directed specifically towards a Jewish audience, because the Torah addresses it's addressing the Jewish people, just like the US law is addressing the people on US soil, but it's not to the exclusion of, or so to speak, taking out from the application of those same laws elsewhere. Active intervention. So what does it mean that you should not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood? Ronnie, could you go ahead and read for us? Continue.
Right. This prohibition forbids us to refrain from intervening to save others when we see they are in danger of death or financial loss, and we have the ability to rescue them. For example, if someone is drowning in the sea and we are able to swim out and save him, or if robbers are planning to kill someone and we are able to dissuade the plotters or protect the victim from harm. Regarding all such cases, we are commanded, do not stand by the shedding of your fellow's blood.
Excellent. So Maimonides clearly connects this to both physical and something which is life-threatening, and also to financial loss. And how do we see that play out? Thank you, Ronnie. How do we see that play out in the case of, let's say, not a mortal danger, but rather financial loss? We have a mitzvah of returning lost items. And this is actually something we'll get back to on another occasion. But Jane, if you can jump in here, text number 7.
You shall not witness your fellow's ox or sheep straying and ignore them. Rather, you must return them to your fellow. So must you do with anything lost by your fellow.
Oh, okay.
Apply to the air conditioner?
What do you think? Let's do one more text, and then we'll get back to that question.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Preventing loss. Now the Talmud sees that. I'll go back a second. The Talmud sees this text. V'chein ta'aseh, and so shall you do with anything lost by your fellow. Now the Torah is very careful with its language. And when the Torah uses a language which is extremely inclusive, so shall you do with anything lost by your fellow. It's not just including every type of item, but it's also possibly referring to another inclusion of another type of scenario. And that we see is including not only things that they have already lost, that you should return to them, but even as we see now, preventing loss. Excuse me here. Rabbi Hananya. Let's look a little bit closer here. Rava taught, and I'll read this for us. This is coming from the Talmud on that text. Rava taught, the verse states, so must you do with anything belonging to your fellow. The mention of anything comes to include preventing damage that is ahead of time, preventing damage to someone else's property. Rav Hananya said to Rava, there is an earlier teaching that supports your ruling. If you observe floodwater advancing toward your fellow's field, you must erect a barrier to protect the field. Here we have the classic example of how different their lives and our lives are, where they were involved in farming and agriculture. We're thinking of somebody who left his light on in his car, and he gets there in the morning and the car battery is dead and he's not going to be able to get to work. It's going to cost him half a morning, and it's going to have to, cost him bringing somebody over to recharge anyways. There are a lot of different applications, but the fact is that you're obligated to prevent damage from somebody else's property. Now, obligated, it's not just commendable. It's not just a moral imperative. You're legally obligated to go ahead and protect his property. Now, there are a number of details that we're not getting down to the bottom of. For example, are you obligated to spend money? If you do spend money, is he obligated to repay you? Are you obligated to spend money to save someone if they're in mortal danger? And if you thereby save them with the investment, are they obligated to repay you? So there's financial, there's mortal life questions. We're not getting down to the exact details of all of this because there are a number of additional details, like I'm saying. So I'll say quickly, when you are dealing with a loss of a life, you are even obligated to spend so that you could save someone. That's a big deal. But they're also obligated to reimburse you. And again, when it comes to preventing loss, the same. Now, how about being a witness? If you could testify in a case that would help the individual, the plaintiff, be exonerated, but it's going to cost you time, it's going to cost you energy to go ahead, maybe it will cost you money to travel and testify. Are you obligated to testify? I think that's a very relevant case where many times people find themselves in legal proceedings that someone on the planet knows the truth and could really help them out. And the question is, will they, or are they obligated to? In Torah law, you are obligated to go ahead and testify.
In civil law also, if you're summoned for jury duty or as a witness, you must go appear.
Okay, so Dimitri is saying if you're summoned as a witness, you must appear. Who gave them your name?
Well, of course, if they know you.
That's interesting.
But you're invited by the defense or by the other side.
And who has to pay for your travel?
Oh, that I don't know.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that. That you could summon, a court can summon a witness?
Of course. If not, you can be jailed for
Really?
some time. Yeah.
Wow.
It's a disrespect to the court or something like that.
Okay.
Or defiance to the court. I'm not sure English term. For this.
Okay. In contempt of court. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. So I wonder if that is because the legal proceedings couldn't really function without the court having the authority. So ultimately, it's not because that you're responsible for that other person. It's because the court has to have some sort of authority to get their conclusion through. So just like they would have to have the authority to be able to implement their decision, they would also have to have authority to get to their decision. That means they could bring you there, but it's not because of your personal responsibility to the fellow who has a court case. It's not a personal, it's a legal obligation to the court. So I guess that's a clear difference there. Okay, so then looking back at our question of Rachel and the air conditioner. So far, what do you think? Is she obligated to go ahead and spend some energy in alerting the owner of the store? Yay or nay? Hands up if it's yes. Okay, that seems to be clear enough. Thank you. It seems to be clear enough. But let's look at what we'll have here. Share. Let's look at the next text, which makes it very clear. Making every effort. Making every effort, and this is in the Shulchan Aruch of Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, which we have portions of, and some portions are actually missing. They were burned in a fire, so didn't get them, but this portion we do have. If we encounter lost items of insignificant value, I'm just trying to think if anybody's up to reading and would like to read, you could jump in and read.
I'll read it.
Okay, Alan, here we go.
If we encounter lost items of insignificant value to the point that if they were our own, we would not bother to collect them and take them home, we are nevertheless obligated to make the necessary effort to restore them to their owner. The rationale is that we have the right to relinquish our possessions if their value is outweighed by the physical burden they impose. However, we have no right to unilaterally relinquish someone else's ownership over their own possessions. The Torah does not allow us to spare any effort, even if the effort is great and the value of the item is minimal.
Wow. Okay, so the next text talks about not testifying. If you would rightly testify but fail to do so.
Those who could rightly testify for someone but fail to do so are not legally liable to provide compensation for the damage they could have prevented. However, such people will not be granted divine forgiveness until they pay for the damage.
Okay, so you're not liable for the financial damages. We can't make you pay for what that fellow lost because you didn't testify. It could be millions of dollars. But somebody knows that you're really intimately involved here in his loss and you could have prevented it. Okay, I don't know who the bookkeeper upstairs is, but apparently they've got a long record and they have a long memory too. So it's hard to get out of any bookkeeping records that are taken upstairs. So you don't want to be responsible for another person's damages because they keep track. So that definitely answers for us about Rachel, and it also answers for us about Dylan. And finally, our third question was about a responsibility we have to each other to influence one another. And that's going to lead us to our final text that we'll look at tonight, which is the text 12. Text 12 and 13. Text 12, I'll share with you here. And again, let's just put the context. You have a fellow who is like this Shegedi, who's obviously on a path of hate, of ultimately damage to the people around him, to himself. Are you obligated or are you responsible to get involved, to really help? Or is it his parents' business? Or is it his teacher's business? Somebody else to blame in the system. So the Torah says that you're obligated to. You're obligated to actually get involved. And we'll finish with these two texts and we'll share a short story which will help us understand how to get involved. Giving critique. Here we are. Mitzvah responsibility, the mitzvah of giving critique to another. Text 12. I'll go ahead and read. You shall surely critique. Hocheach tochiach. You shall surely, it's like a doubled language. Critique your fellow, and you will not share in their guilt, which kind of insinuates that had you had the opportunity to critique, and that would have had an impression on them, and you did not, you have a share in their guilt. Fascinating fact that it says about the Arizal, the holy Ari, Reb Yitzchak Luria, who lived in Tzvat, who was a holy tzaddik, who was a very righteous fellow, that he would speak all of the viduis, he would say all of the confessions. When it came to Yom Kippur, he would speak out all of the confessions. Sorry, God, that I did this and I did that. And he definitely did not do all those things. And yet he was saying those viduis because he was connected, and he is partially affected by and personally responsible in some way, therefore, for the commitments of those transgressions by others. And therefore he would say that vidui because it was a lack, it was affecting him in a big way. So over here, you shall surely critique. Now the word critique is used because it's not at odds with the other mitzvah that we have, which is to love your fellow. This critique is not coming from a place of rejection, where you see someone doing what they shouldn't and you're saying, I reject you, and therefore I'm trying to bring the results to a better place than they would have been otherwise. No, I don't reject you. I love you, but I don't love what you're doing. And what you're doing could be changed. I accept you, but I don't like what you're doing, and therefore I'm going to critique rather than chase you away. What's my business? And so the Rambam puts it very clearly. One should not say, I'll act righteously, and if others choose to stray from the path of righteousness, that is a matter between them and God. This attitude is antithetical to Torah values. Rather, we are commanded to do the right thing ourselves and to see to it that others too are able to and are encouraged to conduct themselves appropriately. This is huge. And I'll just share one heartwarming video. When it comes to influencing someone's actions, especially someone who's on a negative path, the way it is done is huge, makes the biggest difference. You could rebuke and chase someone away, or you could influence them in a way that they'll thank you forever for it. And with this, I'll share, first of all, before we close, this has been wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for all the engagement. But tell me if there are any particular comments or questions that are a la Perek, that are burning, that need to be spoken out before we close up the discussions. Okay, Jane is saying things are just fine. Things are just fine. I'm happy with that. That's good. That's good. And if you have a thumbs up, then give a thumbs up too. We take thumbs up. Okay. So again, any comments or questions are also great for after the lesson. And there is more text here, so you're welcome to continue through the rest of the class in your own time. But here we'll share a beautiful story that I think you'll appreciate about how to. Tell me if you could see it, or
yes.
Yes? Okay. Let's do this.
A young man went over to another Jew at a wedding. He said, "You remember me?" He said, "I don't remember you. Who are you?" He introduces himself. He says, "You were my student. 3rd grade. You were my student. Yeah? wow, I haven't seen you in so many years. How is your life? What are you involved in? He says, I'm a teacher. He says, wow, just like me. What inspired you to become a teacher? What inspired me to become a teacher was you. He said, how did I inspire you to become a teacher? I saw what an impact you had on me. I realized what an impact I can have on children. I decided to go into education. He said, what type of impact did I have on you? So he said, I'll remind you, but I'm sure you remember the story. There was one day that one of my friends got himself, his mother or father bought him a beautiful wristwatch, and I dreamt for a watch, and I couldn't afford one. So I decided to steal his watch. He had it in his pocket. I took his watch, I stole it. He came into class, he saw somebody stole his watch. He came complaining to the teacher, somebody stole his watch. So you made an announcement. Whoever took this boy's watch, please return it. I was too embarrassed and I didn't want to return it, so I didn't return it. So you locked the door and you said, I'm going to have to line everybody up and empty their pockets in order to get back the watch. And that's what you did. And I thought to myself, this is going to be the most shameful moment of my life. And then you said, all boys line up at the wall, but I want everybody to have their eyes closed. Everybody's eyes must be closed. And you went from pocket to pocket, and everybody's eyes were closed. And then you came to my pocket, and you found the watch, and you took it out, and you went through everybody's pockets with everybody's eyes closed. And then you said, okay, everybody can open their eyes. You gave the watch back to its owner, and you never, ever said a word to me throughout the entire year. You never mentioned the story. You never mentioned the episode. And when I thought to myself how you saved my dignity that day, instead of being stereotyped as a ganev, as a thief, as a shakran, as a liar, as a no-goodnik, as a despicable child, you really saved my soul. You saved my dignity. And you never mentioned a word, not only to anybody else, not only to the owner, but even to me. It happened, it's over. I understood the message. And when I looked at that, I saw it. I said, wow, this is what a teacher is. This is what a real educator is. This is what I want to do with my life. And therefore, I went into education. The teacher is listening to him, and he says, wow, that's amazing. That's really amazing. But he says, but Rebbe, you don't remember the story? Like when you see me and you hear my name, I'm sure you remember the story that I stole the watch and what you did, and you didn't want to embarrass me, so you had everybody's eyes closed. And I'm the person, he says, actually, I don't know. I wouldn't know. I wouldn't know the story. He says, why not? Like, it's a pretty dramatic story. He said, because I also closed my eyes.
Okay, so. Oh, my bad.
That's a great story.
There we are. Yeah, it's powerful, powerful story. Separating the person, and that you know that the person is a good person, that you're connected with that person, and you want to be connected, and you have a joint mission together. That some of their actions might not be ideal, and so you separate what they're doing at this moment with who they are, and you say, I'm going to try help and influence and get involved here so that the actions of this person will be better because I believe in them. And I want them to be doing the best that they can and be successful. Moral of the story, get involved. L'chaim, everybody. It's so nice to see you. And it was very special that everyone got a chance to meet each other, whoever was there on Shavuot. It was a very, very wonderful thing. And we should be able to study healthily and happily and meet each other healthily and happily in good occasions, God willing, in the future. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you, everybody, for joining.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
Thank you for
Thank
sending
you.
me.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Good evening, Jane. Good evening, Ronnie.
There were a lot more lessons in that story, though. Don't you think?
There is a lot more?
There were a lot more lessons. I mean, he obviously believed in the basic goodness of